Welcome. This video is going to be a continuation of an introduction to CSS. For this video, I'll be using the Week 7 demo that's out in Blackboard, the Part 2 file. So before I get started, I just want to put out a reminder that it's super important to make sure that we have the correct structure of our HTML document, and once we do, we can then begin to work on our presentational layer. That correct HTML structure is vitally important because it makes creating our styles so much easier. Okay, so I've downloaded that file. I have my file open up into VS Code, and I'm showing the index.html file. I'll open up the preview so you can see what we're looking at. And I'm also going to go ahead and add right away a CSS file inside of our Style Sheets folder. I'll name this index.css. And I'm going to hide my Explorer window to give us a little bit more room to work with. I'll split my preview out so that I have the index and the CSS and the preview showing all at once. And just like with every other document that we create, I'm going to start off my CSS by adding my name and my date and wrapping it with a comment. Now, one more piece to this puzzle that I need to make sure I put in here is it's important to put the link from our style sheet to our HTML file in here so that these two documents can talk to each other. So I'll use the link element. The relationship is going to be a style sheet, and I'm pointing to the style sheets directory, and I'm looking for the index.css file that I just created. And there's one more attribute that I'm going to introduce called the type attribute. It's an optional attribute, but when we set the type attribute, we set it to the type equal to text in CSS. Okay, now we can start adding styles to our style sheet to have them display into our preview. Let's start by targeting the H1 element and making it the color red. I'll type in my selector, the curly brackets, and then color red. So in a previous video I talked a little bit about what makes up the CSS rules, but really there's two main parts to a CSS rule. There's the selector and then there's the declaration. The selector is going to identify the element or elements that we want to affect. Now there are different types of selectors and we're going to learn a lot about those, but the one that I'm showing right now is called the element selector because we're selecting the element. This is the most basic type of selector since it simply names the element that we want to style. Now inside of our style, we have declarations, and a declaration is made up of property and value pairs. Every declaration must end with a semicolon, and we use one set of curly braces to surround a declaration or a declaration block. Our syntax when we're creating these is always going to be the property, a colon, the value, and then a semicolon. Now you can have more than one declaration, and if you have more than one, you're creating a declaration block. For example, if I add a second declaration to my selector to make the text align center, I now have what's called a declaration block. Inside of our declaration, the properties and their values are describing the styles that we want to apply to our selector. Each pair is one CSS rule. There are many different properties and value pairs that you can assign to HTML elements. There's too many to memorize, so don't worry about learning them all. You're going to become familiar with a good number of them over the coming weeks of this semester. So we already had that color red in there, and then we just added that text align property. Now the text align property is positioning our text to our images that are inside of a block level element. In this case, we're centering the text that's inside of our H1 element. Now I just want to point out a quick note. Because the indentation that we're using is an industry standard that helps to improve the legibility of our code. The spaces and the line breaks don't alter the CSS, it just makes it easier for you to consume and then to later on to manage and to update. Okay, let's add a new rule targeting our body element. So again, we're looking at a selector, and that's going to be the body. We're going to use the property background color, and we'll set it to linen. And since we used body to select that particular element, just keep in mind that that's an element selector. We are defining what to style by the element's name. Let's add another rule to that selector. This time we'll target the margin, and we're going to add 35 pixels to all four sides. Let's do one more. Let's target the paragraph element, and we'll use the font family property, and we'll set it to the value of sans serif. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that are out there that we need to know for CSS. Starting with inheritance. How our CSS styles get applied to our document can be tricky, and that's why our HTML structure is so important. Our document that we've been building has an implicit structure or hierarchy, and we refer to this structure as the DOM, or Document Object Model. You might also hear it called the DOM. For just a moment, I'm going to open up an image and overlay it on my screen and talk about the HTML and compare it to the image. So I have this image on the right-hand side. Now this is our index.html file that we're looking at in the demo, as if we're building the structure using this upside-down tree. So when we're describing our document, it helps to think of it in this manner. You'll notice that we have our root element, and inside of our root element we have two children, the head and the body. Now the head element has three children, the title element, the meta element, and the link element. The body has two children, a header and a main. And inside of the main, for example, there are more paragraphs and subheadings. You get the idea. So we can break this down by using names. All elements that are contained within a given element are considered descendants. Like the H1, H2, paragraph, emphasis, and image elements are all descendants of the body. Any element that is directly contained within another element is considered a child or children. So for example, the H1 is a child of the header element. All elements higher than a particular element in the hierarchy are ancestors. So the body and the HTML elements are the ancestors of the main element. And any parent element out there is an element that contains another element. So the paragraph element is the parent of the image element. This paragraph is the parent of this emphasis element. Notice how this paragraph has two emphasis elements? Because the paragraph's the parent of both of those elements, that makes these two emphasis elements siblings. This is really important because it's going to help us to understand how we're going to use inheritance in our styles to pass styles around. I'll move this out of the way and I'll bring up the CSS again. I'm going to add another style to our paragraph element so that the paragraph's colors are all changed to blue. Did you notice how all of the elements that were children of the paragraphs also changed? The emphasis elements are inheriting those styles from the parent. It didn't change the image element because there aren't any font-related properties that are inside of the image element to change. Not all properties are going to inherit. Some styles related to text will get passed down, but things like borders, backgrounds, and margins aren't going to get passed down. We like to use inheritance because it saves us time when we're writing code. But what happens when there's a conflict in our styles? Well, this is where we have the cascade portion of our cascading style sheets come into play. Because cascade refers to what happens when several styles are vying for control of an element, and there are certain rules that the document follows to apply those styles. For example, if I open up my page into the developers tools by launching my live server, take a look at what happens when I'm inspecting my H2 element. I'll select Inspect Element, select the H2 for too many 20s, and notice on the right hand side we have this user agent style sheet. This is the set of default styles that get loaded by the browser. Every H2 is automatically going to be rendered larger and in bold by default. Let's come back to this in just a second because we're also going to create a style for our H2 element to conflict with the user agent style sheet so that we can see which one's going to win. I'll create an H2 and I'll set the font size to 40 pixels and I'll change the color to purple. But before I go back over there, let's do another couple of things. Let's create an embedded style and an inline style so that we can really see a lot of conflict happening. First, my embedded style, I'll change the color to green, and down in my inline style, I'll add my style attribute, and I'll make it red. Now let's go back over and inspect that element again. Notice that the user agent style sheet applied its first crack at it, followed right after that by our index.css file, our external style sheet. Then it tried to add that green style that we created in our embedded style up in the head element. And then finally it gets down to the actual element, the inline style, and it changes that color to red. This is a conflict because it doesn't necessarily say exactly who should win, so the browser has to understand which order to load those styles. It's always going to start with its styles first, followed by your external style sheets, followed by your embedded styles, and then followed last by your inline styles. And the only way you can get around this is if you were to select one of these styles that you want to have and add a little extra item to it. Let's say we really wanted it to be the color purple. Well, if I came into this style and just added an exclamation point and important, then as soon as the browser sees that, it knows that no matter what else happens, this is the color that should win. So with all of that being said, remember, we don't want to use inline styles because it's a headache to maintain. Too many things to change, too many options or opportunities to miskey an item. Same thing with embedded styles. We have too much to maintain. We don't want to use embedded styles, which means that we really want to only create our styles in our external style sheet. So when we're writing out these rules, it's okay to test momentarily using these as an option, but just remove them all before you're finished. Make your final changes in your external style sheet and you'll be good to go. Now typically you don't want to use the important indicator because it breaks the normal inheritance rules, and that can be really hard to debug in the future. So really avoid using that at all costs. The only reason we would ever use that is if we're trying to debug something that's going on with our code and we're just trying to see what would happen. So I'm going to remove the embedded, the inline, and that important indicator and return it back to the way it should be. Alright, going back to this whole inheritance, because even though we've applied a color to our paragraph and we pushed it down to all of the children, what if we didn't want that? What if we wanted, for example, our emphasis elements to have a different color? Well, let's see what happens when we do that. So I've changed the color to magenta, and now there's two styles that are being applied to the emphasis element. If we wanted to see that in action, we could check out the developer's tools. I'll inspect, and notice that it takes that blue color that was first there, it was passed down through inheritance, and then it overrode it with the magenta color that we stated further down the road. We call this specificity. When two styles in the same style sheet are in conflict, the more specific selector is going to win. Let's add another paragraph selector and style it green. Now first, this is something that we should never do because we never want to have two selectors in our style sheet that are identical. We would combine these in the future, but I want to show this to you because it does change our text or our color to green, and the reason it's doing that is because it's in a lower list to the previous paragraph. If I were to cut and paste line 23 and move it above line 14, we'd see something different. In fact, let's do that. So notice it applied the color green first, then it changes the color to blue, because when two styles have the same weight, the style that comes last on our style sheet is going to win. So there's a very specific set of rules. The hierarchy in order, the browser gets to set their default settings first, that's that user agent style sheet. Next, the external style sheets are applied. Then the next one is the embedded style sheets. Next is the inline styles, and then any style with the importance indicator comes up last. And then conflicts in the same style sheet are resolved by specificity and rule order. Now before I mentioned when you have two selectors that are in your style sheet, you need to combine those declarations together so that you only have one of each selector. So rather than having two different paragraphs, I should just combine these into one. In this case, my property and my value pair are in direct conflict with each other, so it doesn't make sense to have both a color blue and then a color green, because the blue is just going to get ignored. So we would just remove that one entirely. But when you're working with a lot of CSS, it may not have been really easy to find that mistake if you had all of your selectors written out separate. So let's remove that one. And another common thing that I would like to make sure that we're aware of is what we call grouping selectors. That's where if we have more than one selector that's using the exact same declaration. So for example, what if I wanted my emphasis to also have the font size of 40 pixels and to have the color purple? Well, rather than just repeating the exact same declaration and adding up all of those extra lines of code and making it even harder to maintain that code in the future, we would just combine our H2 selector and our emphasis selector. To do that, all we have to do is use a comma-separated list. Using that comma is going to be the equivalent of saying the word and. So you would say H2 and emphasis. and you wouldn't even need to have this second one on here. So we could just remove that. Or maybe we wanted to have the H1 and H2 and the emphasis have a solid 1 pixel blue border. We just targeted 3 separate elements using 1 line of code. And the really cool thing is our border that we just used is using what's called a shortcut property, where we specified the width, the style, and the color of the border all at once. Now there's one more thing I want to point out. Sometimes it's really hard to see what's going on with our code. For example, not everything is going to have a box drawn around it, like we're doing with this blue border on our H1, H2, and emphasis element. But it does make it easier to visually see that element having that border drawn around it. The browser is going to see everything as if it's contained inside of a box. What if we wanted everything to be inside of a box that we could see? Well, we can target every element in our document using a universal selector, which is the asterisk. So I'm going to add that. An asterisk, this is every single element on our page, we're targeting it all at once. And I'm going to set a red 1 pixel border. I'll also comment out this blue border, just to make it easier to see what we're looking at. We'll talk a lot more about the box model pretty soon, but it's really helpful to actually see every element on our page in this manner. Notice that the block level elements are extending the entire width of their container, where all of our inline elements like the emphasis and the image, that border is just extending to the width of its containing element or its containing content. Having this as a visual representation is also pretty powerful in the future when we're trying to debug things. So that was a lot of material that was covered, all about the introduction to CSS, but if you have any questions on any of this content, please don't hesitate to ask.